All right, let's dive into a really dramatic story that's been making the rounds online. We're going to break down a narrative about an alleged military attack on Venezuela. Now, it's super important to remember that everything we're about to go through comes from the claims made in just one online video source. Our job here isn't to fact-check it, but to really understand the story that this source is telling.
So the source doesn't waste any time. It jumps right in with this bombshell claim. A full-blown military assault is happening right now in Venezuela's capital, Caracas. This is the big, central idea that the entire rest of the narrative is built on.
And according to the source, the result is exactly what you might imagine: total and complete chaos. It paints this picture of a capital city just thrown into a state of panic because of this alleged attack.
And get this, the source gets really specific about the firepower involved. It's not just a vague claim. The narrator lists U.S. Air Force fighter jets, Chinook helicopters, even naval missiles. And they're not just flying around, they're reportedly carrying out direct strikes on military complexes.
Naturally, the source then zooms in on the human and political fallout. We're told that civilians are literally fleeing for their lives, trying to get out of the capital. And at the same time, the Venezuelan government has supposedly issued an official statement condemning the whole thing as an act of military aggression.
So the big question is, why? Why would an attack like this be happening right now? Well, the source doesn't just report on the what. It offers a very clear theory on the why. And this is really at the heart of the video's argument. You see this split here. On one side, there's the supposed official reason given for the attack, fighting drug trafficking. But the source says, no, that's just a cover story. The real reasons, it claims, are all about getting access to Venezuela's huge oil reserves and getting rid of a government that's friendly with rivals like China and Russia.
And to back that claim up, the source points to this number. It alleges that less than 1% of illegal drugs coming into the U.S. are actually from Venezuela. So for the narrator, this statistic is basically Exhibit A for why the official drug trafficking reason just doesn't add up.
From there, the narrator zooms out. The argument is that what's allegedly happening in Venezuela isn't some random, one-off event. No, the source frames this as just the latest move in a long-established pattern of American military intervention.
And what's so interesting here is how the source lays out this historical playbook, so to speak. It points to past actions, the bombing of Serbia in the 90s, the toppling of rulers in Iraq and Libya in the decades that followed, to suggest that what we're seeing in Venezuela is just them running the same play all over again. The source even quotes from American media to hammer this point home. It argues that these kinds of interventions, well, they often create more problems than they solve, leading to long-term instability. The rise of ISIS in Iraq after the invasion is held up as the poster child for the kind of chaos that can be unleashed.
And that fear of chaos leads to the next big point. The narrative expands its focus beyond just Venezuela, warning that this could set off a chain reaction, a ripple effect that could throw the entire continent of South America into turmoil.
The source visualizes it as a domino effect. You can see the steps here. It starts with the alleged attack on Venezuela. Next, the operation supposedly spreads to its neighbor, Colombia. And from there, the negative impacts just spill over into other major countries like Brazil, Ecuador, and Peru. It's a picture of a full-blown regional crisis. And to make this feel incredibly urgent and real, the source highlights the immediate alarm it says is coming from neighboring countries. It claims Colombia's president is so worried about being the next domino to fall that he's already calling for an emergency meeting at the UN. But here's a fascinating twist in the narrative. The source argues that this intervention is actually very selective. It puts forward this idea of a lithium triangle made up of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. The theory is that these countries will be spared because their lithium reserves are just too important for things like batteries. It's an argument that this is all based on strategic resources. So all of this brings us to the future. The source paints a picture that's dangerously uncertain, and it starts raising these really big, critical questions about what happens next.
One of the biggest criticisms the video brings up, again citing U.S. media, is this apparent lack of any long-term plan. Okay, so there's an intervention, but what's the endgame? The source asks if anyone has actually thought about what happens the day after. How do you govern a post-conflict Venezuela?
And that question leads to an even bigger one, a geopolitical one. The narrator wonders out loud, are Venezuela's powerful allies like China and Russia just going to sit back and watch? Or will they step in? And if they do, could this whole thing escalate from a regional conflict into a massive international crisis? The source also raises this really stark possibility of a long, messy, and costly conflict with no easy way out. It draws a direct comparison to the war in Ukraine, essentially asking if the U.S. could find itself bogged down in its own quagmire in Venezuela.
And that all leads to this. This is the final, core warning that the source wants to leave with its audience. The idea is simple but powerful. When you intervene without a clear plan for what comes next, you don't get stability, you get chaos. It's a really provocative thought, and according to this one online narrative, it's the most important lesson to take away from this entire alleged crisis.